very much for showing up. How's you guys' summer going?
Going good.
Good. I just I grew up in another desert in southeast Washington State, and I remember the first time my dad showing me that you could fry an egg on a metal slide. Um, and I thought I'd moved away from all that until I moved to St. George. Then I see the slides outside the city county building here in St. George, and I'm thinking, I wonder how many eggs people are going to cook on those. It's going to be, oh man, that mm, it gets hot. It gets super hot. I have some friends that are from Kuwait, and they own or they have shares in a property outside of town here because they love coming to St. George in the summertime because it's so cool. I just that is ridiculous. Well, I have been going through. I got all caught up in grading over the weekend, and then a couple people turned in a bunch of stuff, so I am getting caught up again. But when Saturday hit, everything that had been turned in that I saw was graded. And a couple people have been pointing out things, which has been very helpful, that were not like links and things like that were not working. And so I've been trying to get a hold of those. If you come across it, just email me, let me know, and I'll take care of it as soon as I can. So I really do appreciate that. Now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but as I go to that, oh, hi, Nicole. Good to see you here. Did any of you guys have any questions about the stuff that we covered and worked on last week? Because I think we talked about this last week and we talked about this, and I thought it might be kind of cool. I want to show you guys a couple of the tessellations that people did. Um, Only a few were turned in, but I want to show you a few of the ones that were turned in. So we got, I'm sorry, let's see. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move things around so we can actually see a couple of the other things that people turned in. And I'm just going to show you a couple, I think. Stuff like this, a lot of people did stuff like this, and I think this is fantastic. I mean, this looks great. Um, I love how, from the what I've seen, people have really done some nice and fun work on this. And one thing I like about this one is that the person made a pattern inside of here and then filled up some of the spaces with black so that the blue and red really stands out. And I love seeing stuff like that where you guys are really creative. So that turned out really well. Now, not everybody's turned those in. Uh, if you have any questions, please let me know. But we went over it last week pretty well, and I even showed how to actually do it. So if you have not watched last week's video and you're confused at all, just go back and check that out. Okay. So when we were winding up last week, we talked about Impressionism. When Impressionism happened, uh, you guys remember that Renaissance starts at about 1350, and that's when people really started doing very realistic things with really realistic looking shading. Do you remember why they tried so hard to make realistic looking human bodies and why they were able to shade their colors? What was special about the paint at the beginning of the Renaissance that people had not been using beforehand? What was different about that paint? Do you guys remember it all? One
Technology.
technology, yes. It was a big
Yeah.
thing was technology with the paint. Um, before from about 200 BC until the about 1300 AD, people had most paint dried within a matter of hours. And by applying boiled linseed oil into the paint and mixing the pigment with the linseed oil, they were able to extend the drying time by sometimes days, which meant that they could actually do a lot of shading. And one of the reasons why the human form was, I mean, so much effort was put into making the human form look naturalistic was not because human beings had never been able to do that before. We see photorealism in all sorts of art before that time, I mean, everywhere in the world. But remember that when people create stuff, their styles that they use and the things that are most important to them reflect what's most important to the society that the artist is a part of. And so it is more important, for example, during uh, the Eastern Orthodox Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, when the center of Rome was actually in Turkey. Uh, it was more important that you understood who the saint figures were and what their roles were, what their attributes were, than that they looked photorealistic. And so it wasn't until the Renaissance when, after the end of the Crusades, a lot of people started really focusing on this idea in the Bible that the human being was the highest of God's creations. And so the exploration of the human form and the technical depiction of the human form became almost a religious observance by a lot of the artists because that was so vital to the religious culture of the communities that they lived within. And so that's why you have so many anatomical studies and people trying so hard to get anatomy correct because it mattered. And there, it, sorry, that even though there's a lot of art movements in Europe and North Africa between the Renaissance and the 19th century, that kind of attention to detail and focus on the detailed human form remained pretty consistent with all the different art styles and all the different art movements. In the 19th century, do you guys remember what happened specifically in much of the world leading up to the 19th century that did not happen before? Uh, there were several things.
One was the Industrial Revolution,
Yeah, exactly.
train travel.
Train travel, the Industrial Revolution, but a lot of the around the world you have variations of this kind of feudal society where most property is owned by a very few number of people, and the great majority of people never really see or have an opportunity to access what we would think of as real wealth. And during the Industrial Revolution, that's when people started getting serious jobs, and that's when you see an explosion of middle income people or uh, that was really unseen for much of the world, except for about 300 years right after the introduction of the Quran, because the early Muslims really that and Sikhs as well a little bit later, but part of the religion was that it was okay to ask the creator for physical blessings. And so you get a middle income population that exploded. And that's when you see an explosion of a lot of the Eastern arts. But then you come over here to Europe, and at the end of the 18th century, going into the 19th century, so we're talking about 1830, right around there, that's when there's a lot of people that have money that didn't ever have money before. And of course, just like any kid being sent towards a candy store with money in their pocket, you want to spend it on something. But since these people were not raised as aristocrats or members of royal or noble families, their interests were very different. And that's when we got talked about people being aware of how eyes were structured. You get rods and cones, and you see little points of light. We get aware of this, where everybody starts becoming aware of things like that everything is made up of molecules. That actually, those ideas were actually first addressed in written literature by the atomists about 5th century BC in Greece, but it wasn't really part of the popular discourse until the 19th century, believe it or not. And that's when you get the birth of things that later became, 80 years later, things like physics and stuff like that as we understand them today, nuclear physics. And then what Susan said about the train, if you can imagine getting on the fastest horse in the world, you were still going 25 to 35 miles an hour at the most. And suddenly everybody who could afford a train ticket could get on the train and ride it and go 35 miles an hour and feel like you're flying with the birds. And it was amazing. And but couple that with middle income population that wants to access stuff that they're familiar with, you get romanticism and realism, which are two styles of art where in realism, it was a realistic portrayal of everyday events that the artist concentrated on. So this is where you get people working in the fields, focusing on that, or people riding their carts around, or kids waiting for uh, a boat to pull in. You're not focusing on biblical stories and historical stories. And then romanticism is when people are trying to show the natural world as being something that's incredibly beautiful. If anybody's ever gone out camping without bringing toilet paper and enough water, the natural world could bite you in the butt if you're not prepared for it. And but Impressionism was the first time, and we're talking about 1870 or so. This is the first time that the artists were really trying to show the world how they saw the world instead of going back to what the Renaissance brought about, a very strong awareness of the human body and trying to focus on naturalistic looking things. And that's all the lead up, a little bit of what we talked about last week, but that is all leading up to this week's or the studio assignment. And some of you have already done it. I want you guys, don't pay attention to the due date so much as, try to do the stuff after I talk about it. And I'll try to fix the due dates as I can. But what I want you guys to be aware of is we're not painting stuff so that it's supposed to look like what everybody else is expecting it to look like. The Impressionists never were interested in doing that. The Impressionists were interested in using bright colors and just fun application of paint to show everybody how they saw the world, and put their own unique spin on it. And this is really where we start getting the idea that the artist uh, has a right to do their own thing. And believe it or not, the even the phrase, how many of you have heard beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Yeah, and people think, oh, that goes way back. That's always been the case. Well, no, that phrase was first published in 1812, and it was published along the lines of when galleries started realizing that they could actually turn art into a commodity something that could be bought and sold with ease, so that people could be painlessly separated from their extra income. And that's where it starts showing up. Because beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. Whether or not something is beautiful, it's always there. It's the beholder, it's me or you, the viewer. It's our job to use our senses and our capacity to understand and appreciate somebody else's visual vocabulary to recognize the beauty that's there. If beauty was only in the eye of the beholder, there'd be absolutely no sense in anybody doing anything, because if all the worth was only resided only with random people looking at it, I mean, they're absolutely, it would be impossible to have any sort of a shared consensus. And so, uh, when Shakespeare said a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, what he's talking about is the rose is always a rose, regardless of what you call it. Another illustration of the kind of thing I'm talking about is, can any of you read Navajo? It's really, I mean, I've never been able to. I was raised with three Navajo brothers. I can't read Navajo. But if I have my book and they have their book and it's the same book, but theirs is written in Navajo and mine is written in English, it the fact that I can't understand their book is reflective on me not understanding the vocabulary. It does not mean that their book is worthless. Do you guys understand that? And if you don't agree with me, that's totally fine. I don't really care because I'm the teacher. Okay. Anyway, so what we're looking at is, I don't want you guys to worry about painting a fruit so that everybody else can see it's a fruit. That's not what we're going for. What we are going for is, I want you to make something where you are paying attention to the different colors that you see and the areas of the colors that you see, not that it's a fruit. And why would I say that? Anybody have any idea why I would say that? Don't think of it as a fruit, think of it as a collection of colors. It goes back to what the Impressionists were trying to show uh, people. An artist never paints what they see. I'm not going to say never. Um, it's very, very rare that an artist will paint or draw what they see. We always paint or draw what we think about what we're seeing, because it goes from the eyes through our brain and translates back out to our hands. It passes through whatever thing is going on here that gives us our identity and our idea of self. And so when I paint a banana, or when Jeremy paints a pear, or when Nicole paints a bunch of grapes, we're not painting those things. We're painting what we think about those things. And if anybody doubts this at all, look at, have any of you ever collected or seen the drawings of somebody in your family, a kid, as they go through life, as they grow up? Have you ever seen how the drawings change? Because my kids, when they were really tiny, they were fascinated and enthralled with the fact that they had the power to make a mark on a piece of paper, or unfortunately, sometimes living room walls. But they were just amazed. And so that's why you see scribbles. They're not worried about making an image. They are enthralled with the idea that they have the power to make a mark. Later, as kids develop and start making things that they can give labels to, they will change the size and relationships of the objects in their drawings to reflect how they interact with whatever that is. Like if they're doing a painting of grandma, they're going to draw things like grandma's face, maybe her eyes and her mouth. They're going to draw her hands. But you in the drawings, you'll see that the legs may be really, really tiny, or maybe not there at all, or the number of fingers are rarely correct, anatomically correct. The joints in the elbows, and the shoulders, the anatomy is not important. What's important is that there are digits that interact with the child. There are facial features that interact with the child and show emotion. Not, and they're so unconcerned about where those things are on the person's body. And then as they get older, there's a greater and greater interest in how they relate to other people, how other people uh, see or share the symbols that they're trying to express. And that's when you see more and more attention to try to make something look realistic or naturalistic. Because as we get older, especially as we go into teenagerhood, we are so concerned about how other people think. That's when we start really getting involved in this idea, oh, it has to look quote unquote right. And that's when we start seeing, things like realism show up powerfully in emerging drawings. It's all reflective of what the artist is thinking and not what they see. Do you guys understand that? There's a really good book. Oh, I hope I remember what the name is. Um, I think the name of the book is How to Draw What You See, but it is, or Drawing What You See, but it is a book that really goes through all this, and it teaches you in about 16 lessons how to get to a point from only drawing what you're thinking about it to drawing it to the point of other people can see what you're seeing too. And it's more about you getting relationships and perspectives and proportions to the point where other people can see the same thing that you're comfortable with. And that's how you draw so it looks naturalistic and realistic. So I'll try to find the name of that book, and when I send this video out, the recording of this for attendance, I'll put a link on there to the book so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But I believe our library on campus has a couple copies of it that you can check out if you're interested. Anyway, going back to so that's all the background for this, coming in, emerging into this world of Impressionism. This is really marks the beginning of what we think of as now modern art, because this is when artists are concentrating on sharing with the world how they see the world and how that vision of what they see is different than everybody else. And so when you do this, there's a video here that I'm also going to link up because I'll also put this in attendance so you guys can watch it. But what I want you to do is, I'm not worried about it looking like a real apple or a real pear, and I'm using massive foam finger air quotes around that. What I want you to do is when you look at the fruit that you use, I want you to do your best to draw the outside silhouette of it, and then try to figure out what are the shapes of the colors of that fruit. And if we look at somebody like Cezanne, that's what they would do. Now, this artist is painting, but they're using the paint to kind of draw and sketch the fruit that they're doing. And they're not painting the background, they're not painting the apples. What they are actually painting is the areas of color within the background or the apples. And I hope you guys can see that, where there are these light spots of blue, dark spots of blue. They're not worried about this fusing together and looking like a background. And as they start going into the apples themselves, what they are doing is painting the areas of color, not worrying about, again, not worrying that it looks like an apple, that other people see that it's an apple. They are just concentrating on the areas of color, and that's it. And I want you guys, as you approach this, I want you to think about it in that way. And you can see they're painting the white, they're painting the pink, they're painting the blue that's reflecting off the background. They're painting these areas. They're not worried about the apple looking like an apple. They're just painting the areas of color. So is this making sense to people? Okay, if any of you have cameras that are working, can you show me your reactions?
Yeah, that answers the questions that I had about the assignment. And that book is How to Draw What You See, I think. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I'm going to, let's see. I'm going to pull up a page. Yes, okay. It's this book here, How to Draw What You See. That's exactly right. And I'll put a link if I can find a link to Amazon, I'll put that up there so people can see it if anybody's interested. But what the painting is, all you're doing is painting the areas of light and dark and different colors, and that's it. I don't care if it, quote unquote, looks like an apple when you're done, because you look at these. If you actually saw this in a basket of fruit, it would make you want to vomit. I mean, they look pretty scary. That's not what we're worried about. This is what Impressionism is all about, where they're painting the spots of color and the areas of color, the areas of light and dark. They're not worried about making it look, quote unquote, naturalistic. So, so that's what I want you guys to work on. And this works best if you have like my watercolor pad is about like this big. When you do this, don't worry about the background on the fruit. Don't worry about anything else. Draw the silhouette of the fruit as big as you can get on there so you have plenty of room to do the different spots of color. And I think what you'll find out is that this will turn out an awful lot better than if you try, quote unquote, to paint a banana or an apple. So is that making sense to folks? Jeremy, Erica, or Nicole, you guys have any questions about that? Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Switching gears with absolutely no uh, intermediary, we're moving forward. Impressionism. Well, I want to point out something really quick. Move forward with that though. Um, you guys are going to hear a lot of stuff that art historians have kind of co-opted for themselves to make themselves feel important. And that's words that sound like they're synonyms, but they mean something specifically different in an art historical context. These words are modern art, postmodern art, and contemporary art. Those three phrases. You think that they mean all the same thing. Well, they don't, not at all. Modern art is the sequence of art movements and styles where artists are really exploring being able to share how they see the world themselves with everybody else. This is where the artist stopped worrying about how everybody else saw everything and only or tried really hard to express how they saw color and light. This is where you get Cezanne and Mondrian, or not Mondrian, but Cezanne and Monet and Van Gogh and Marie Cassatt. These artists are the ones that really focused on how they saw the world. And then as we move forward in time in this modern art era, that's where we get the Picassos. And that's where we get the artists that we're talking about today. People are really working on the abstract kind of idea. And this time period between 1870 and about 1950, and this is all about ish. There wasn't Nobody woke up on January 17th in 1857 and decided, today I'm going to start Impressionism. That's not how it happened. I mean, just they're loose ideas of time. And in the modules and the quizzes, they do talk about it a little bit. But this is where we get what we're abstraction. This is where we get abstract expression, the birth of abstract expressionism, a lot of these kinds of things. And this is also where gallerists and critics try to stand in the way between you and the artist, get in the way. They try to validate their own, brand new made up jobs by telling you how to think about art. And a lot of really frustrating stuff for me personally. A lot of frustrating stuff happens because there is no reason for you guys, for anybody, to feel intimidated or frustrated when they're encountering art. It should be something that you can just kind of relax and enjoy. But that's not the case. A lot of the times, like I think I told you guys last week, uh, somebody in one of my classes last semester, somebody asked, "Well, what does this art mean?" And she said, "Well, this is what I think it means." And the person that was on the museum tour just told her how dumb she was. And it just that's never the case. All artists appreciate that, yes, they're making something specific, but they also know that it's not really complete until you, as the viewer, put your own spin on how you understand it. And so, the great vast majority of artists, they're not the ones that want to put up walls between you and the artwork, walls of understanding or intimidation. Anyways, preach, preach, preach. You guys don't need to hear that, but there it is. You didn't need to hear it, but I gave it to you for free. Worth every penny, and you can get all your money back from that single statement. Okay, so what we're talking about now, Dada, Cubism, and Surrealism. Impressionism began 1850, 1870, right around there, and moved forward to about 1915, 1920, right around World War I. That's the heyday of Impressionism. Starting about 1907, that's when we start seeing Cubism showing up. That's when we start seeing the birth of these things that became Dada and Surrealism. Now, what's different about the world in 1907 from the world of 1870? Well, this is the birth of the automobile is a big one. You have additional speed. You have all these other things that are happening. Lots and lots of technological advances, just amazing stuff. But also the world as a whole is changing economically and politically with a rapidity that nobody had ever seen before. This is where we start getting the rise of airplanes. In 1915, you could go around the world entirely in less than a month and a half. And even 20 years earlier, that would have been impossible. And now it took me 24 hours, no, 22 and a half hours to get to Iran. Okay, which is a long way away, but that's still less than a day. Can you imagine if you, as a teenager, Europe was impossibly far away, and then when you're in your 20s, all of a sudden you realize that not only could you get there in a day, or yeah, flying to it, but it was also cheap enough that you could pay for the ticket. I mean, that is just ridiculous to me. It's amazing. But with that rapidity, a couple things are happening. One is people are able to communicate faster than they ever have before. We also have all sorts of the birth of what became social media, and politics is rapidly changing. After World War I, believe it or not, the German government was so shattered that they were actually, different elements in the government were actually helping roaming gangs, arming gangs to go around and start chaos in the streets and just shoot randomly. And with the fact that people could communicate all around, people in Germany were talking to people in France and elsewhere in the world, and a lot of people were very concerned with what it seemed like the world was collapsing. You get all sorts of economic stress and everything like that. But then in areas that weren't so war torn and you don't have such immediate concerns for your own safety, one of the things that artists were came up against was this idea that everybody else was telling them what their art meant. And artists don't like that. And so what we get out of that, all that, is artists communicating all in countries all around Europe and the United States and Southern Canada. All these people talking about what can we do to really kind of give the permission to decide what art is back to the people that make art and to the people that see it. And that's where the Dada movement came out. It was basically, it's all it was an art movement that was designed to engage people in thinking about the art that they were consuming. They did not want it to be just wall furniture. They wanted people to ask questions about who has permission to decide whether or not something's art, who and who gave them that permission. Does putting it into a gallery mean that it's art and everybody has to agree to it? That's one thing. If it's a sculpture, what kinds of things make it a sculpture? This is where you get people like Moreau who would find garbage and he would put the garbage together in these odd little shapes and then cast it out of bronze. And then suddenly it would be a sculpture because now it's bronze. When, 3 hours earlier, it was garbage. And but the reason why the movement was called Dada is that they were exploring things, uh, all sorts of things about that relationship between uh, makers and viewers and what art is. A couple examples would be uh, this right here is a collage. This is where you really start getting people working on collage, where they would make these large images that were not paintings. They would cut out social media images, from the social media at the time, and put them together in new combinations, following a lot of the rules of aesthetic balance that we talked about earlier, and those principles of art and design. But they wouldn't paint the actual images themselves. They would cut them out of magazines. And that offended a lot of people. Also, they would make sculptures like this where they're mannequins and they're just store mannequins, and they would put them in different positions and give them titles. Because does art mean it has to stand by itself and be a title and have a title? Well, who knows? And then they would also do things like make poems where they would write a poem and then pull all the words out and either have it performed where four different people would say the words all at the same time and you have no idea what they were saying, but all the words would be there, or they would present the poem with all the words in alphabetical order, which again, it doesn't make any sense, but it gets you to ask questions about, well, what makes a poem? And for me, a poem is the words need to evoke something specific, and that evocation comes with the kinds of words that are chosen and how they're arranged. And that's one of the reasons why um, I like some of the poets that I do. But so this is called a photo montage or a collage. And this is called uh, Cut with a Kitchen Knife Through the Last Epoch of Weimar Beer Belly Culture in Germany. And Hannah Hoch was really, really brave. Looking at this, it looks confusing. It looks weird. There is a couple, there are a couple videos on YouTube that talk about it. But what she did was took images of famous political figures and would do things like here's Stalin's face on a big baby's body. Here's Karl Marx bouncing around like his head is bouncing around like a volleyball. And these are things that people got very serious about. And Hannah was just kind of showing that the world is in chaos, and the people that are trying to tell us that they know what's going on, they may not really know what's going on. And so she did get in trouble for some of the stuff that she did. But I think you can probably kind of see the birth of a lot of stuff that we're familiar with today. Like, I don't know if you guys, there are like SpongeBob SquarePants. Have any of you ever watched the SpongeBob SquarePants cartoon? Maybe you guys see that? Because that in animation does a lot of the same kind of stuff that Hannah Hoch did with her collages, where she made fun of everything she could and put her life at risk doing it, which I hope is not the case with the people who did SpongeBob. And Cubism, this is something interesting. Well, you look at this, it's really hard to make sense of this kind of thing. I mean, it looks just weird and odd. But one of the things that, as people are shifting into the early 20th century with this rapid ability to communicate all around the world. This is when people not only have telegraph cables across the oceans, but they also have phone lines across the oceans. And you can actually hear a voice that's thousands of miles away. And it's the first time in the history of the world that anybody knows about where that was true. And so these artists, these are called Cubists. I hope you can kind of see why it's called Cubism. The first Cubist art show, a critic came and said, I don't like it. It just looks like it's a bunch of stacks of little cubes. And I hope you can kind of see that. But what the Cubists were doing was they're realizing that the world is a much smaller place than anybody kind of thought. But that also meant that everybody has a capacity to communicate, everybody has their own worldview, and maybe it's okay to assume that other worldviews are as valid as yours, which is a dangerous thought. And so when the cubists would paint something like this, what they would do is the model would not necessarily sit still. They weren't interested in having him sit still. What they were interested in is walking around the model. And maybe they paint this side of the head and this side of the arm right here on the canvas. And then when they walk around, they paint the part of the loot right here and this hand over here. Then they'd sit down and paint different area. And then they wait a couple hours so that the light is different. And then they paint something else at a different point of time. And what they're trying to share with you is not, I'm going to see if I can get this whole thing in one shot. Okay, here we go. What they're not trying to do is show you a woman playing a lute so much as in one painting. Show the activity that this person had while they were engaged with holding and playing the lute over the course of a day or two. Can anybody see that where this is a collection of bits and pieces of different perspectives and different points of time and different areas of what the model is doing, and they're trying to put all that on canvas at the same time? Can any of you guys see that?
I can see it now that you've pointed out, but I didn't get that on first look.
Well, I'm looking for something. Uh, Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp did something called Nude Descending a Staircase. And he was trying to share his thought process with other people. Let's see if I can find, let's see. I'm trying to find something that I found a while ago that I thought was really, really good, where it was actually he took several photos of somebody actually walking downstairs. And I don't know if you guys can imagine taking there's several contemporary artists that do this as well, but if you can imagine taking the same taking several photos in succession of somebody walking down a staircase and then putting all those photos that they overlap, this is the kind of thing that the cubists were trying to do. And I hope you can kind of see that, where this person is over the course of a day they're painting different areas of the sky and the landscape. So this part right here on the right hand side of the mountain is the early morning, and you get some of these light green spots that are the early morning. And then this right here, maybe there's a cloud behind the mountain during the noon, and this is where you get some of the brown coming out. And then in the evening, this is where you get some of the darker, richer colors. But the person is trying to show you what this looked like over the entire day, but without video technology. And then I also want to show share these kind of different perspectives of people, different perspectives as you walk around a room, as you look at different spots. So the Jeremy, Nicole, and Erica, can you guys kind of see that a little bit about what's going on?
Yes.
That's starting to make sense. Okay. At this time as well, in the early 20th century, you get people like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud that are really making people very aware of how deep our subconscious runs and how much it controls us. And this is where we get the birth of surrealism. And I'm talking about all these things at once because these these three different principal movements really overlap quite a bit. And so this is where you start getting paintings where it's they're painted so that the individual elements are more naturalistic, but they're things that would never happen in the actual world that we live in. And as you look at this, it seems almost impossible to understand, but that's the way it's supposed to be. The artist is not wanting you to immediately understand what the story is. This is supposed to be a dream. That's why you have this wise jellyfish man here. This is why you have the ghost dancer going down this weird corridor. This is why you have clouds in and plants inside of a room. This is why you have two pale-faced or pale-skinned children and a minotaur here wearing red robes, and then two greyhound because why not? And bubbles. This is not supposed to be a realistic landscape. This is supposed to be what a dream looks like. And so it's called surrealism because it's drawn to be semi-realistic, but it's the sur comes in because it's supposed to be an expression of a dream. And these artists that were doing this kind of stuff, they were all exploring these ideas of incredibly rapid communication, multiple perspectives, um, trying to define what art is, but also giving the power to viewers and artists both to define what art is and asking us to ask the question, what is art? And then also exploring dreams and making the artists kind of making themselves vulnerable by sharing the dreams that they have. And dreams don't necessarily need to make sense. They're not supposed to. But the best surrealists would do stuff that either you get really engaged and you kind of connect with it, or you wonder what what is going on. Either way. And that's what surrealists do. So when you write this reflection, I want you to write a sentence or two about each of these three: Dada, Cubism, and Surrealism. After you kind of brush through those three things a little bit, and if you want, it isn't going to hurt at all. Find a 4-minute video on YouTube about surrealism or any of those things. And if we go to YouTube, I want to show you this. We go to Art History 101, and then I'm going to type in surrealism. What I like is I'm getting some really good short videos on what surrealism is. Like here's a three minute one. This Art History 101 is one of the best channels. And I really like this guy's take because they do a really good job of talking about it. Don't worry about like a 23-minute one. Look for the 3 or 4 minute one at the most. And then he talks about different kinds of surrealism. And you could do that with any of the art styles. But what we're going to be doing is just talking mostly about what. Oh, I'm showing you the wrong thing. Sorry. We're mostly going to be just talking about uh, primarily Dada and Surrealism. I don't want you to worry too much about um, Cubism. What we're going to be doing, and this is something that you can do with a group of people or by yourself, doesn't really matter. We're going to be doing two different things. When the Dadaists would get together, they would call their groups, their meetings, exquisite corpse exercises or the exquisite corpse, just because they liked those two words together. It doesn't really describe what they were doing, which is basically, be a session among friends. They just liked those words. And so what you're going to be doing is creating uh, several different things. And I want to show you see. I want to show you some examples of this from a previous class, and I'll explain what's going on by sharing this example with you. What you're going to be doing is creating 5 nonsense sentences, and I go through the process that mimics how surrealist artists would do this. You're going to make 5 nonsense sentences, and then you're going to create 5 illustrations, drawings of those nonsense sentences. And the important thing is you're doing your best, not that it's, illustration quality. And then after you do that, you're going to randomize the titles that you just drew from and give new titles to your drawings. Let's see. And I want to show this. Okay, here we go. So in the exercise, in the actual thing, I tell you, make a list of words like the and the, make a list of words like descriptive words like soggy or wet or colors, different things like that. I have you have two different lists of nouns, and then also words that describe how people move, um, and then actions, the verbs. So we're doing adjectives, nouns, adverbs, and verbs. And what this person did is made several different drawings, 5 different drawings from these sentences, and then mixed the sentences up and gave random sentences as titles for each of the drawings. So look at this. Soggy pigeon awkwardly whispers. You have this mysterious banana wondering what's going on. Obviously, that doesn't have anything to do with that title. We scroll down, the dramatic banana slowly stares suspiciously. Okay, well, that title fits this, but by following the directions, they gave a completely different title to it. Now, this one, it's going to be like some sort of clown that's decapitated, that's crying or something like that. We go down here, and we can see also the 3 different drawings that they did. But here, the invisible toaster aggressively argues yesterday. This drawing has nothing to do with that. Let's see. But right here, this is the toaster drawing. Does that kind of make sense? You're making 5 random sentences that are of randomized words. You're drawing each of those 5 sentences, and you saw, the caliber of drawing that this person did, which, they did exactly what they needed to, and you can see what's going on, so you understand what's going on. And then they randomized those 5 sentences so that they didn't have anything to do with the drawings that they did. Do you see what the process is? I don't know if I want to ask if that makes sense, but does that kind of make sense what's going on? What you're doing is you're creating artificially something that makes as little sense as a dream would. And that's what the process is. Okay, then the next part of it is, if we go back to this, you're going to make creature drawings. And this you can do it with a group of people or by yourself. And with this, you're going to take 3 pieces of paper. You're going to fold them in thirds like this, and you're going to fold them over so that you can only see 1/3 at a time. And on the 3 pieces, you're going to draw the head area on all 3 of them, and you're going to draw different heads. Then you're going to mix those up and fold them so you only see the center part. You're going to draw bodies on each of the 3 centers. And then at the last one, you're going to mix them up again and draw feet or bottoms or tails on all 3 of them. And then after you're all done doing that, you're going to open it up so you see what the finished drawing is. And if we go back to this student's submission, oh, here's Godzilla praying. I love that. So this is their three drawings. They did, I don't know what that is, maybe Snoopy, somebody working out, and then legs, and then another one. You have a clown head, a skeleton body, and then clown feet. I mean, it doesn't need to look like anything. What you're doing is randomizing the head, the body, and the bottom part. And so when you submit, what you're going to be submitting is those 5 drawings with the brand new titles and those 3 drawings that make no sense. How many of you have ever done those the threefold drawings where you're at a party, everybody draws a head, then you switch, people draw bodies, and when you get all done, I mean, the creatures make no sense. How many of you have done that before? And if you guys are interested, we can talk about this again next week and stuff. Only a few people have done this already and turned it in, and that's totally fine. But I want you to be thinking about the the process rather than the result. Don't think about how good these drawings are. Don't think about whether or not it makes sense. It's designed not to make sense. And that's what the exercise is. Surrealism and Dada are all about trying to get you to question what are the trigger points that help us to decide whether something is artistic or whether or not something makes sense. And that's what the exercise is. So if it doesn't make sense, you're succeeding. And if the threefold creature looks really impossible and funny, you're doing it right. So does anybody have any questions about that? Jeremy or Erica, do you guys have questions? Okay. I'm going to take the unrip. Not right now. Okay. Erica responded and said not right now. Excellent. Okay. Now the last thing we're going to be talking about today is abstraction. And again, when you guys go through this, I'm how many of you guys have been doing the quizzes with one page on your browser open to the module and then your quiz right there as well? So you can just kind of read through the module and take the quiz. How many of you have been doing that? Because if you do that, that is perfectly fine. I want you to do that. There's no reason anybody is not going to get a perfect score on the quiz. Or if you miss a couple, go back and retake it until you get a perfect score. And I do go through and tell people what questions they've missed, if they've missed any. But go through and look at these things. The next thing we're going to be talking about is abstraction. A synonym for abstraction is actually simplification, and it can be objective or non-objective. If it's objective abstraction, you can tell that somewhere in the distance past, while the artist was working with it, it may have been a plant or a person. If it's non-objective, then the origin of the art never existed in the real world. Examples of this are when an abstract artist will do lettering or geometric shapes, like Hilda or Hilma does in her work. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But abstraction has always been around, but there wasn't an art movement called abstract art until the last 120, 130 years. So this, what Brian did when he organized this is talk about the common narrative and parts 1 and 2. The common narrative is that abstraction as we know it as an art movement started in 1910. And this is when people start specifically moving away from this kind of impressionistic, this is called um, abstract, or this is called expressionism, where it's kind of an offshoot of impressionism, but it's moving a little bit more away from a lot of the gentle lines and shapes. It reminds me of Van Gogh quite a bit. And this is when we start moving away from Impressionism into abstraction, where even though the tree might still be there, the artist is less concerned about making you see a tree than he is playing with the lines and shape, or she or they are with playing with the lines and shapes of what the tree inspired. And can you see the difference between this image of a tree and this image of a tree? It's the same tree, it's just Pete Mondrian is standing on opposite sides of it. And this one is done more like an impressionist style, and this starts becoming more abstract. And this becomes even more abstract. And you can kind of see they're not worried about the tree anymore at all. They're just worried about the loops and the curves. The colors, there's no intent to make the colors match what the naturalistic tree is, except for maybe a little bit of green here and there. And the artist is just exploring the curved lines. They've simplified the tree down to curved lines. And this one, I'm sorry that image is not showing up. I'll have to see if I can find it. But this is what that image is. This starts becoming incredibly abstract. I don't know. Can any of you guys see a tree in that image, in that painting? I find it really hard to see a tree there, but a tree is what inspired this painting.
I can see it a little bit. Looking at it, I'm looking for a tree. I can see it.
Okay, all right. If you I think that this is a good illustration of where abstraction comes to. If you don't have the context, if you didn't know it was a tree, it'd be really hard to tell that there was ever a tree there. Would you agree with that? Okay, good. Yeah, and that's the kind of area that we're going to. Now, the problem with that idea that abstraction wasn't invented until 1910 is that I think we can argue that with what people were doing beforehand, with Impressionism, they were kind of knocking on the door of that abstraction. And I think you can kind of see in this painting, this is supposed to be an Impressionist painting, but with these dots and stuff like that, it is getting really, really difficult to tell any sort of real world equivalence to what's going on in the painting. And then here, even more so. I mean, there's two trees and a mountain and some horses, but if you didn't know these were horses, almost be impossible to tell they were horses with riders. And if you didn't know that these were trees, it'd be almost impossible to tell. And if you put this on the top, if you turn it upside down, it'd be really hard to tell. It'd be almost as hard to tell what it was as it is now. you know and this is where artists become less and less concerned about communicating to you a specific story than just explore the ideas that what they see gives them. So you're really seeing what the artist is thinking. They're shooting off in different directions with where they've seen. It's not very often that you see a tree in autumn that's actually this color pink. You do see one, but it's very rare. However, the artist really loved that pink, and so they thought, well, why not make the whole tree pink? And that's what they did. Because why not? They're in charge of it. Now, can any of you see the landscape in this painting? With my little pointer, here's some buildings here.
I can see a path in the mountains and a tree,
There's
maybe.
some mountains. And it's getting harder and harder to see that. We can still see it a little bit here. Now, can you see any landscape here at all? I mean, I don't see anything. I mean, Susan's right. When Susan's talking about the hills and things like that, yeah, as you're talking about it, I can see it. But without any of that context, it is difficult. But when you start imagining, okay, this is a landscape, then you can start seeing things. Here, one of the reasons why it's so difficult to see the landscape is that Kandinsky was actually painting the noises that came out of the landscape. And so we're getting a real glimpse as to what they're thinking without the constraints of a shared reality. And I think stuff like that is just fascinating. And it starts becoming a painting that is just interesting to look at as its own self. It's just a group of colors and shapes and things like that. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I just don't get it. Well, and that's fine. But then I want you to start thinking to yourself, have you ever been to a large city and closed your eyes just for a minute to listen to all the sound? And then if you were trying to share with a friend of yours who couldn't hear it all, what that sound looked like, what would the painting look like that you made? And it's fascinating. It's amazing to me that this is the kind of question that artists felt like they could ask. And then they started painting. Wassily Kandinsky is one of my favorite painters, and a big part of that is because he was exploring those kinds of ideas. What would sound look like? What noise does yellow make? What color is a violin? The notes from a violin. I think stuff like that is just fascinating. Now, here's another spin on the whole idea. Hilma af Klint, she was a painter. She was rather renowned in the late 1800s. She was a dedicated landscape uh, impressionist, and her landscapes, she sold them regularly. People loved Hilma's landscapes. And you look at these, and they're just, if you can imagine, this thing is about 3 feet tall and about 7 feet long. I mean, they're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're very beautiful, detailed landscapes. You can almost hear the wind through the trees and the noises that the geese are making. Her stuff is just gorgeous. But in her attic, in the upstairs room that she never let anybody go into, she was painting stuff like this. She was exploring ideas about sound and emotion. How do you paint those so that other people can kind of see how your own mind is reacting to different thoughts and emotions? And I just think that this is really fascinating. Now, I don't know if any of us will ever know exactly what was going on inside of her head when she painted this. I think that's less important than the idea that we're getting a glimpse into somebody else's thoughts. Whether or not we can understand it, I don't think that that is as important as the fact that we're actually seeing something else that somebody else is thinking, whether or not, and I just think that that's fascinating. And her stuff, oh, I'm sorry, I'll have to go through and try to find images again. But this is the kind of stuff that she painted. And I hope you can kind of see a little bit of that surrealism here, because I see some wings here and I see a couple figures here. But she's doing this kind of stuff. And here's Ouroboros right here, the snake that eats its own tail. Her colors, I think, are really vivid and bright. What you don't know, most likely, is this painting is about 6 feet on the side. These are really 6 to 8 feet square. They're really big paintings. They're tall. And I love this kind of thing with these rainbows and prisms, this kind of thing that reminds me of just an oscilloscope or a sound wave going up. And she's doing here's almost a mirror of two geese, but not quite. Their bodies are mirrors, but their heads are doing something that kind of flow into each other. I don't know what these are. They almost look like, yeah, it looks like this is a bird's head and this is a wing. And then you get this spiral coming out. This, I think, is really interesting because you have these cubes that are done in kind of a spiraling perspective. And then you get the thing that looks like almost a scientific diagram right here. But these are the things that she was doing while she was selling these absolutely gorgeous landscapes to people. She was just exploring this and hiding it away. These are very definitely abstract paintings. And what is so fascinating to me is she made many, many of these and didn't want anybody to see them because she thought nobody would like them. And I just, yeah, and you can kind of see how big these are, about 8 feet on an edge. They are gigantic. They are, you almost lose yourself. If you're going to a room where there's nothing but these on the walls, you almost lose yourself completely. And I think it's amazing. What is interesting to me and really sad is Kandinsky and Mondrian, Picasso, all these guys, predominantly men, and the Hannahs and the Hilmas and the Maries are so often either missed entirely or set off to the side, like somehow they're not important. But you look at the work that Hilma did, and it influenced textile designs in the 60s and 70s. And the stuff that she does, you can still see in design work today. Just absolutely amazing, amazing work. So, and this talks about a lot of these kinds of things. What is the nature of abstract? What does abstraction mean? And abstraction means you're simplifying the world around you and you're emphasizing different elements that are not like that in the natural realm that everybody shares their experience in. And sometimes that abstraction is drawn from the actual world. Sometimes that's drawn from things like geometry and sound and letters that are never part of the world. And the difference is one is generally just called abstraction when its origin is in the physical world, like those Mondrian paintings we saw, and the other is called non-objective, like the Hilma af Klimt stuff, where she's working specifically with geometries and just playing with color. These things do not have a basis in the natural world. And those are what the two big differences are. So when you write your reflection about the abstract, just think about all that stuff. These four different areas where you get the common narrative, part one and two, the new spin where we talked about Hilma, and then the nature of the abstract, where it kind of ties it together. And the reflection that you're going to be writing is specifically just talking about those ideas. All right. And where you just reflect on it, follow the directions. Now, this one I put in because it is right now, today, in the most of the schools that I've been in, women to men, the ratio is usually somewhere about 52 to 56% of women in art programs compared to about 44 to 48% of men in art programs. And this is the schools that I've been at, that I've taught. And I thought I was sharing stuff with you, and I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm just rattling on. And what I was talking about earlier is written reflection, where you are I'm asking you just go back through and look at the common narrative, part one and two, new spin and nature of the abstract. New spin is where we talk about Hilma, but tie all those together in your reflection. And then I bring this one up because there is a gender bias in the art critic world, the world of art marketing. And it has made dramatic changes over the last 10 years. But have any of you heard of Artemisia Gentileschi? Is that name familiar to anybody? Artemisia Gentileschi. She was actually one of the late Renaissance, early Baroque women painters that was world renowned, and people would travel thousands of miles to live at her house and learn painting from her. When she died, she had a couple students that were male that painted over her signature, put their own names on, and then sold her paintings. And her name was forgotten until X-ray technology revealed her actual name on these paintings, and people realized, holy cow, this is somebody that was almost entirely erased from history. And this does happen. So what this is, and I just want you to use your capacity for critical thinking to look at what's going on between Lee Krasner, Helen Frankenthaler, and the husband of one of her friends, Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock was married to Lee Krasner, who was another painter as well. All three of these people did abstract expressionism. They were very much abstract painters. All of them were doing stuff that changed how people looked at art. But magazines of the time showed Helen Frankenthaler in a particular way, and they showed Jackson Pollock in a particular way. And that's how they were always portrayed. Now, what's really interesting to me is even today, in the schools that I've taught at, you have a little bit over half of the art students are women, and but it's still pretty close to half and half. But when you look at gallery representation and museum representation, even though there's a pretty good guess that half of the artists have been women, you still get 85 to almost 90% of the people of the artists being shown are men, and 85 to 95% of the bodies being shown are women. So even though it's about half and half men and women in the art field doing art stuff, it is still heavily skewed. And what I think is just so ironic about that is, do you guys remember what is the rough percentage of women painters in the prehistory? Do you guys remember the rough guess about what percentage of the cave art that we see was done by women? It's about 75 to 80%. And then today it's reversed. And the only reason I'm bringing this to you is I want you to use your critical thinking and just go through each of these steps. Step one, look at the two images and consider how the two artists are shown. Both of them dramatically impacted the art world. And both of them, those images became iconic, representative of them. And then I want you to write 50 to 75 word descriptions for each of these using those 4 tools of artistic critique in the back of your head. And those 4 tools are description, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation. And then as you look at them, I want you to think of at least 3 similarities and at least 5 differences. And again, keep in mind the tools of artistic critique. Now on this, there's 30 points for this one. So it is a little bit longer writing, but it's 30 points. So it's a little bit greater pointage. So that's the first part, those two, 1 and 2. The second part is use 50 to 75 words and come up with ways that you think the differences might correspond to gender biases. And this is just maybe as simple as there's a lot of soft colors here. In 1950s, when these photos were taken, soft colors were what advertisers thought attracted women buyers. And in this one, there's a lot of harsh lines and activity, and this is what advertisers thought were attractive to men. And that's one of the things you could do. Okay, that is very much a gender bias, and you can see that with the type of advertising that was done in men's and women's magazines at the time, as well as the different TV shows and stuff that were geared towards men and women. And there's a short article here that you can look at, and this talks about stereotypes and things like that. And I don't really, I'm not looking to indoctrinate anybody as to we are talking about this was a reality of the 1950s and 1960s, and I'm just asking you to reflect on it. And then the third part is write a final 50 to 75 words reflecting how this kind of bias still impacts today. And I do not think, from my personal observation, I do not believe where we are today is anywhere like this. Anywhere. If you look at any of the artists represented on campus today, it is nothing like this stereotypical division at all. But this still impacts us today. And I think one way it does impact us is that a lot of us go out of our way to make sure that it doesn't impact us. We expand our field of view and our field of experience to sidestep the expectations of the 1950s. And I think that is true of most people that I've met. You know, we know that those kind of stereotypes happened in the past, and we are very aware that we do not want to fall thoughtlessly into the same kind of trap. And you know, so that's how that kind of bias still impacts us today or affects us today. We are aware of it and we're working against it. And I think that that is absolutely wonderful. So think about this. Oh, and I wrote the wrong name. I said Lee Krasner here. It's actually Helen Frankenthaler. So I'll have to change that out. Anyway, so that's what you're writing in here. So this is, you know, three different parts of rather long-winded reflection. And then for your abstraction, this is something I really wanted to talk about because people have been turning this stuff in, but they have not been following the directions really well. What we're doing in this is exploring what abstraction is. And I do not want you to feel like you need to communicate a story or anything like that. We're not worried about that. A couple of the things that I really need you to focus on is in this, there cannot be any human figures, not even stick figures, and there cannot be any recognizable forms like hearts and simple flowers and things like that. We're staying away from those kinds of things. We don't want anything cartoony. And it's really, really, really vital that you stay away from all that. What we're going to be doing is starting up by writing down four emotions. How many emotions are there? There's thousands of different emotions. When we're babies, we only think of two emotions, satisfied and unsatisfied. And unsatisfied rapidly turns into anger, frustration, and I'm hungry. But as we get older, we have a greater expanded awareness of the different kinds of emotions we have until there's lots and lots and lots of emotions now. So I want you to think about four emotions. And for each of those four emotions, create a list of all the things that come to mind. And I'm not talking about other emotions. I'm just talking about the things that come to mind. And it may be, let's say one of the emotions is fear. And for me, I love watching all the 60s, 70s era cowboy films. So if the emotion is fear for me, one of the things that I would write down, a list of all the things that come to mind would be yellow. Because, you know, there isn't a John Wayne film that addresses somebody in the movie that it feels fear where they don't talk about them as being yellow. But there's other things. Maybe spiders is something. I don't like spiders. I don't know if fear is the right word for me when it comes to spiders. More like screaming Mimi anxiety that keeps me awake at night and wants me to crawl up the walls. A little bit more than, a little bit greater than fear. But I want you to think of all the things that are associated with each of those four emotions. So you're going to have a list of four emotions, then list of several things that come to each of those. Then you're going to start drawing. For each of these four emotions, you're going to do 3 thumbnails. That's a total of 12 thumbnails. All right. So each of the four emotions, you need 3 thumbnails. So 3 thumbnails times 4 is going to be 12 thumbnails. A thumbnail is a drawing that's about 2 inches by 2 inches. And that's it, just a small little drawing. There should not be any flowers, stick figures, or recognizable shapes. So you're not drawing a narrative or anything like that. Let's say one of your emotions is anger. Some of the things that come to mind about anger are jagged lines and red. So maybe in my thumbnails, I'm going to explore sequences of jagged lines, maybe things that look like explosions. And one thing that you can do, if you have a really good idea, but it doesn't look abstract, if it looks too much like a stick figure or something like that, what I want you to do is blow up a part of it and turn it on its side. And then do your thumbnail from what you see in that new picture. And when you think about it that way, you're drawing stuff that's inspired by the list of things for each of the four emotions, but nobody other than you is going to be able to tell what that is. And that's fine. That's what we're going for. So you can have a total of 12 thumbnails. Next, you're going to take one of your three thumbnails for each emotion and do a painting about, I would say, no smaller than 6 inches by 6 inches, bigger if you want to, but you're going to do a painting for each of those four emotions that are inspired by your thumbnails. You don't have to do a direct copy of any of your thumbnails, but I want it to be inspired by the thumbnails. And again, no stick figures, no easily identified shapes like flowers or hearts or things like that. And then what you're going to be doing is taking a picture of your word list. And this is one of those cases where you can write it down with a pencil or whatever. You're going to take a picture of all 12 of your thumbnails, and you're going to take photos of your four finished paintings. And you're going to submit all of that. Now, this peer review thing, if it shows up, go ahead and try to do it. But I don't know. I'm not worried about you doing it. Don't worry about it. I'm if the computer system shows up that you can do it, go ahead and do it. It's kind of frustrating to me because um, not everybody gets their assignment done all at the same time, and the peer reviews show up when you submit your stuff. So if you're the first person, or if you're the first or the second person or the third person, it's going to be impossible for you to get the reviews, and you're probably not going to be able to go back and rework them. So don't worry too much about the peer reviews. All right, just worry about this stuff. Now, does anybody have any questions about doing the abstract drawings? How many emotions? I'm going to call on Jeremy, Erica, and Nicole. Jeremy, how many different emotions are you supposed to write down?
12?
Nope,
Shit.
that's only thumbnails, but it's just four emotions. Now I'm going to lead into you're going to get the answer right because you're predicting the future. If you're doing three thumbnails for each of the four emotions, Jeremy, how many thumbnails are we doing? Jeremy, how many total thumbnails?
Can you hear me?
No, yeah, now I can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. It's the 12 thumbnails, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, perfect.
So four emotions, three thumbnails for each one for a total of 12 thumbnails. So that's exactly right. Now, Erica, how many paintings do you do? Or Nicole, how many paintings? Oh, it looks like we lost contact with both of them. How about you, Susan? How many paintings?
One for each, so four.
Exactly. Exactly right. Excellent. Very good. So four emotions, a list for each of the four emotions of the things associated with that, three thumbnails for each emotion, and no stick figures, no flowers, no hearts or easily identifiable symbols, and then one painting for each emotion inspired by your thumbnails. All right, so that's, and I like the paintings to be at the minimum 6 inches by 6 inches. I think that'll work out. Now, have any of you been to North Commons building to room 112 and use the art tools there? Because you guys, even though this is an online class, if you want to, you can go there and it's just you go through the room 112 and on the left-hand wall are two cabinet doors and there's art supplies in there. So if you don't have painting materials or things like that, you can access it there. The only caveat, and it's a big one, is you have got to clean up after yourself. Well, there's two caveats. And the other one is you cannot do anything if there's another class in the room. But other than that, you guys do have access to that. All right. So you guys got that? You understand what's going on? Any
Yes, sir.
questions about this? Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy. I didn't know you were driving. That makes it a little bit more difficult for you to interact.
That's okay. And you got my email regarding me playing catch up on a majority of the main assignments just because of the death in the family, correct?
Yes, and that's first. I'm sorry for your loss. That's horrible.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
But that's something. I'm glad you said that, Jeremy, because that's something that I want. I've gotten several emails where people are saying, "Oh, I'm just ready to give up on the class because I'm so far behind." You guys can turn in anything, everything can be turned in up until the last day of finals. And that's just turn in whatever you have. Play catch up if you need to. Resubmit everything you don't get a perfect score on. Just turn in whatever you have. Over this weekend, I had one person turn in 15 different assignments. And that is I love to see that. I love to see it when you're catching up. Just do whatever you need to. All
Copy
right.
that.
So that is great. And I'm glad when something like that, when family is involved, when something horrible happens, take whatever time you need. And if you did need additional time, contact me because we can work things out with student counselor or whatever, the student body counselor or whatever, so that we can get you back on track when you're able to do it. So,
Copy that. Thank you, Andrew.
sure thing. All right. Does anybody have any questions? I know we covered an awful lot tonight. Does anybody have any questions about any of the stuff that we covered? Because we talked about Impressionism, we talked about Surrealism and Dada for the studio stuff, and we talked about just now abstraction. If anybody doesn't understand any of this stuff and your head is about ready to explode, reach out. I'm more than happy to do like a Teams meeting or send
Hello. How
additional
are you?
videos.
Good to see you. You ready for school to start?
Oh, Jeremy, I can still hear you.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
No, but reach out to me, and I'm going to also be sending for the attendance. I'm going to be sending just like a short little 3 or 4 minute videos that talk about each of these art movements that we talked about. You guys can go ahead and watch in addition, with that attendance stuff. You don't have to comment on them, but they're there so that you can watch them and just get a little bit of a reminder about the stuff that we talked about today. All right. Well, thank you very much for being with me today. And thank you for your participation. And I hope you guys have a wonderful and safe week and weekend. And if there's no other questions, I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Any last minute questions?
Nope, I think I'm good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
You're welcome.